The wind came hard off the mesa, dry and sharp as flint, scouring the skin like it meant to take something. It swept across the dead wheat fields and rattled the fence posts until they sang in low, aching tones. Along the narrow track that wound through the red dust and brittle sage, a woman walked. Her skirt was torn along one hem, flapping with each step. One shoe had lost its sole. The other clung on by will alone. She had nothing with her but a wrapped bundle clutched to her chest, cloth stiff with old blood and newer dirt. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes blinked slow and hard, fighting the sun that hovered like a hammer above the plains. A boy no older than 6 staggered behind her, too tired to cry anymore. On her hip she carried a smaller child, near weightless now, the way only sick or dying children ever became. No house stood for miles. No trees. Not even the bones of old cattle long since scavenged. Just the long, empty hush of land that had forgotten how to listen. She stopped when she reached the gate, a single post holding the memory of a fence, its wire long rusted out or stolen. Beyond it, a wide field sloped up toward a low house built of earth and stone, crouched beneath the sweep of an old cottonwood tree. Smoke rose faintly from its chimney, almost lost in the blue glare of sky. She swayed. A low moan came from the child on her hip. She blinked and looked down. The girl's face was gray as ash and her mouth hung slightly open. The woman shook her gently, then harder. "Sarah," she whispered, but the word cracked in her throat. Then the dust came again, curling up the track behind her. Not wind this time, hooves. Slow and steady. She turned, eyes squinting against the glare, and saw a rider approaching. A man in a wide-brimmed hat, his shirt the same color as the dust around him. His horse moved like it knew where it was going without rush. He pulled up a few feet from her and looked down. His face gave nothing away. Weathered and lined with a pale scar that ran from ear to chin. He didn't speak, just looked first at the woman, then at the boy behind her, then at the child in her arms. She took a breath, tried to straighten. "Please," she said, "help my children." It was almost too soft to hear. The man dismounted, not hurried, not slow. He stepped forward, looked her full in the face. She did not look away, didn't flinch. There was nothing left in her to flinch with. He reached out and took the bundle from her arms. She stiffened, but let him. His arms, when they touched hers, were warm, strong. He held the little girl with a kind of quiet care, then glanced at the boy who had now sunk to his knees, listing forward in the dirt. "You got names?" he asked. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She tried again. "Clara. That's Sarah. My boy's Eli." His eyes lingered on her face. "You got a name?" She nodded. "Clara May Densmore." He nodded once as if weighing it. Then he turned toward the house and said, "Come on. Let's get them inside." He didn't ask where she came from. Didn't ask what happened or why she was out here with children near dead. Just started walking. She followed, her legs barely working. Her knees shook and each step felt like the last she could take. But she took another, and another. At the porch he pushed open the door and stepped aside. She stepped into the cool dim of the house and smelled beans cooking. The air was thick with wood smoke and something faintly sweet. The man laid Sarah down gently on a cot by the hearth and knelt beside her, fingers pressing lightly at her throat. "She's alive," he said, mostly to himself. Clara's knees gave out then. She sank to the floor and covered her face with her hands. She didn't cry. There was nothing left for crying. The boy crawled toward her and leaned into her side. She wrapped an arm around him without lifting her head. The man moved quiet, like someone used to trouble. He poured water into a tin cup and held it out to the boy, then looked at Clara. "You need food, rest." Clara nodded, though she barely heard him. Her eyes kept drifting to her daughter's face, pale and still. the kind of stillness that lives too close to the end. The man squatted beside the cot, brushed a strand of hair from Sarah's forehead, and said softly, "She'll need broth. Little at a time. I'll get it started." She looked at him then, really looked. His hands were scarred, sun-darkened. The kind of hands that knew work and loss both. But they moved gentle. That was when the first tears came, quiet and slow, sliding down her dirt-smeared cheek. He didn't say anything more. Just lit a lamp, stirred the pot on the stove, and kept glancing toward the child in the cot, as if making sure she stayed. Night came slow, as it does on the high plains first, with a cooling of the air, then with the long blue hush that settles before stars. The wind died down and the silence grew heavy, almost sacred. Inside the house, the walls held in a soft warmth from the stove, the kind that wrapped itself around you without asking permission. Clara sat near the cot where Sarah now breathed steadier, her small chest rising and falling beneath a thin quilt. Eli had fallen asleep, curled on a wool blanket, in the corner, thumb tucked under his chin, like he used to do back when there was a crib and a lullaby and someone to hum it. The man moved around the kitchen like he'd done it all his life. He didn't talk much, didn't ask questions. He served Clara a bowl of thin bean broth, heavy with garlic and a few scraps of cured pork, and set a cup of water beside it. She nodded her thanks, so the words caught in her throat again. He pulled a chair from the table and sat across from her. "You walked a long way," he said. Clara nodded, staring down at her bowl. She lifted the spoon, but her hand trembled too much. She set it down again. "I didn't mean to come this far," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse. "Didn't think we'd make it this far?" "Where from?" She hesitated. "Outside of Telluride. A ways off. Nothing you'd know." He gave a small nod, not pushing, letting her go at her own pace. "My husband," she said, voice flat. "He left 2 winters back. Went looking for work. Never came back. I kept the house as long as I could. Then the mine took the land. Claimed it was owed. We didn't have a deed. Just an old word and a burned-up paper. The man listened. That was all. Not the kind of listening that tried to fix anything, just the kind that let you be heard. I thought maybe my sister'd take us in," Clara said. "She's out near Gunnison, but they've got 7 already." Her man said no. She laughed once, bitter and small. "Didn't even let me in the door." "What about the children's king?" "They're all mine," she said. "My blood. Nobody else left." Outside something shifted. A branch creaked in the cottonwood. Coyotes called in the distance, sharp yips and one long, mournful cry. Clara looked toward the window. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. The man leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes steady on her. "Well," he said, "you're here now." She looked at him. "I don't even know your name." "Jonah Keats." She nodded. "You live alone." He gave a faint smile, barely more than a twitch. "Always have." He stood, picked up her untouched bowl, and poured the broth back into the pot. "You'll eat tomorrow. Sleep tonight." He offered her a folded blanket, rough wool but clean. "Take the cot next to the fire. I'll sleep out in the shed." Clara hesitated. "No," she said, her voice firmer than before. "You shouldn't. We'll take the floor." He shook his head. "You've got children. They need you warm." Before she could protest again, he was already pulling on his coat, lighting a lantern, and stepping outside. The door shut quiet behind him. She sat still for a moment, unsure what to do with the softness she'd just been given. She glanced down at Sarah, who stirred faintly in her sleep. Eli snored gently, breath-catching now and then, like he was still chasing fear out of his dreams. Clara got up, tucked the blanket tighter around Sarah, then knelt beside Eli and brushed his hair back from his brow. She looked around the room. It was simple wood walls, chinked with mud shelves lined with jars and a few well-worn books. Everything smelled of cedar smoke, coffee grounds, and old work. She lay down near the fire, one hand resting against Sarah's blanket. For the first time in many nights, she didn't listen for the sound of footsteps outside or the creak of a door left ajar. There was only the fire and the ticking of an old clock and the weight of quiet that didn't feel dangerous. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now they were not out there. They were here, alive, warm. Another dawn waits ahead. Subscribe to see it. Morning brought frost. It glistened on the grass outside like spilled sugar and crept in through the cracks in the walls until the air bit sharp enough to sting. Clara sat by the stove, stoking the fire with kindling from a stacked box. She moved slow, every muscle sore from the road, but it was the kind of ache that meant you'd lived through something. Sarah still slept, but the fever had broken. Her face, though pale, no longer held that gray sheen of the night before. Eli had woken hungry, which felt like a miracle. Clara gave him half a biscuit from the kitchen counter and saved the rest for later, hiding it beneath the quilt. She was buttoning her blouse when the door opened and Jonah stepped in, carrying 2 buckets of water. Steam rose from the rim. "Pump froze," he said. "Had to break the ice." He crossed the room and poured water into a basin by the window. Clara watched the way he moved, careful, steady. She stood. "I can help," she said, unsure if she meant now or just in general. He looked over his shoulder. "You'll want warm clothes first. Boots too. What you got won't hold up." Clara glanced down at the worn skirt, the split shoe. "We didn't carry much," she said. "Just what I thought we could." Jonah set the bucket down and nodded. "I got some things. Might not fit right, but they'll do for chores." He walked to the back room, the door creaking as he opened it. She heard the sound of boxes being moved, then the dull thump of boots hitting the floor. She stepped closer to the stove, held her hands near the heat. Her fingers had gone raw with walking skin cracked at the knuckles. She flexed them slowly. He returned with a bundle wool trousers, a heavy coat, and boots worn but sturdy. He laid them on the table without a word. Clara looked at the coat. It was lined with flannel thick at the shoulders. She ran her fingers across the fabric. "These belong to someone," she said. He didn't answer right away. "My father," he said finally, "died near 15 years ago. I don't mean to take what isn't." "They're yours now," he said. She looked up. His face was unreadable, but something passed through it, something quiet and unfinished. Outside the sun was rising higher, warming the frost to steam. Clara dressed quickly, folding her old clothes and tucking them near the hearth. The trousers hung loose at the waist, but she cinched them tight with a rope Jonah handed her. The boots fit close enough. The coat swallowed her whole. Jonah opened the door. "Let's see what you know." She followed him out into the yard. The land was wide open to the pale sky, the kind of space that made a person feel small, in a way that could either break you or save you. The wind had calmed and the air smelled faintly of cedar smoke and thawing earth. He showed her the hen house first. The hens clucked and scratched, their breath puffing in little white clouds. "You ever fed chickens?" She nodded. "We had 6 once. Until the fox came. Same fox out here. Keep the co-op shut tight." She scattered feed while he checked the latch. Then they moved on to the barn, low and square, with a lean-to on one side and a milk cow chewing slowly in a corner stall. "Daisy," he said, patting her flank. "She's old but steady." He handed Clara the bucket. "You..." She hesitated. "Watched my ma do it. Never had the knack." "Then you'll learn." He showed her how patiently, without pride or mockery, and after a few tries the rhythm came. The milk hissed into the pail in soft streams, and Clara felt something loosen in her chest. They moved to chopping wood after that. He let her try the axe, watched her stance, corrected her grip. Her arms ached, and the first few swings glanced off the log, but she didn't give up. Not once. "You got grit?" Jonah said. She looked up at him, sweat on her brow despite the cold. "I don't have the luxury of anything else." He nodded once. That seemed answer enough for both of them. By the time they walked back to the house, the sun was high and the front room was filled with the soft sounds of children stirring. Sarah was awake now, propped up with blankets, a faint smile playing at the edge of her lips. Eli ran to meet Clara as she stepped in, wrapping his arms around her middle. "You were gone," he whispered. "I came back," she said, kissing the top of his head. Jonah set the pail of milk down and stepped back to give them space. Clara met his eyes. Something passed between them then, not quite gratitude, not quite understanding, but a seed of both. Something had begun. The days stretched out, quiet and cold. The wind changed direction, carrying the smell of thaw and old earth as winter began its slow retreat. Clara rose before dawn each morning, hands stiff with the ache of unfamiliar labor. She milked the cow while her breath fogged the air, collected eggs still warm from the nest, and hauled water from the pump when it wasn't frozen solid. Her body moved without asking if it should. Jonah said little, but he watched. When she struggled with the axe, he showed her again. When she burned the beans one morning, distracted by Sarah's fevered coughing, he scraped the pot clean without a word of blame. They moved around each other like two people learning the same song by ear, quiet, careful, slowly in tune. Each night they sat near the stove after the children had gone to sleep. The room would dim, shadows pooling in the corners, and the fire's crackle would fill the silence between them. She learned that he had no brothers, no sisters. That his mother died when he was still a boy, and his father raised him hard but fair. He never said why he never left the ranch. He didn't have to. The land had taken root in him. "You were married?" Clara asked one night after a long pause. Jonah shook his head. "Never stuck." She waited. He didn't say more. "I was 17, she said. He was 23, had a charm to him. Swore he'd take care of me. First winter came and he pawned my ring for whiskey. Next spring he left with a wagon crew. Said it was just for a job. Never saw him again." Jonah didn't look at her, just stared into the flames. "You think he's still alive?" he asked after a moment. "I hope not," she said plainly. "Not because I hate him. Just because I can't stomach the thought of him somewhere still walking free while we nearly starved." Jonah nodded once. "Fair." Silence settled again. Sarah began to heal, slow and thin but brighter each day. Eli never strayed far from Clara's side, not even in sleep. Jonah carved him a small wooden horse one evening and gave it to him without a word. Eli ran his fingers along the smooth edges, then held it to his chest like it was something sacred. Clara watched from across the room. Her throat tightened. "You didn't have to do that," she said later quietly. Jonah shrugged. Didn't seem right, him not having something of his own. That night she found herself looking at Jonah longer than before, his hands stained from fence tar, the worn dip of his hat brim, the way he always lingered near the children, but never too close, like he didn't want to crowd the space they needed. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side, repairing what winter had worn down. Clara helped patch the chicken coop and mend the garden fence. Jonah cleared brush, checked the roof, and brought in bundles of wood thick as her waist. She found herself humming while she worked a tune she hadn't thought of in years. She didn't know where it came from, only that it felt like it had waited inside her, quiet and patient, until now. Jonah heard her once and stopped what he was doing. He didn't say anything, just listened for a moment, then went back to work with a strange softness in his face. One morning snow fell again, late for the season. The sky dropped flakes heavy as cotton, and the world turned white all over again. Clara stood at the window holding Sarah on her hip, watching Eli run in circles through the yard with the wooden horse held high above his head. "You should let him keep that," she said. Jonah, sitting by the stove, looked up. "Wasn't planning to take it back. I mean," she said, hesitating, "you should keep being someone in his life." Jonah's brow furrowed like he wanted to speak but didn't know how. Clara turned from the window, looked at him straight. "You've been more to these children in 2 months than their father was in 6 years." He swallowed once, nodded. Snow tapped gently at the windows, a soft rhythm that filled the silence. He stood, slow step, toward her. "Clara," he said, voice low, "I ain't sure what this is, but I know I don't want you to go." She didn't smile, but her eyes did. "We're not going," she said. The thaw came sudden and hard, like something had snapped loose in the earth. Creeks that had been frozen since November began to run muddy and loud, and the snow shrank down into the gullies, leaving behind fields, soaked through and glistening under the pale sun. With the melt came work more than before. Fences needed mending where the posts had rotted. The roof of the old shed caved in under snowpack. One of the hens laid eggs with blood in the shell, and Jonah had to put her down before the sickness spread. Clara didn't complain. She worked alongside him, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands blistered and cracked. She grew stronger, leaner. When she smiled now, it stayed longer on her face, not vanishing the moment she remembered how the world could be. But with the thaw also came the rider. He arrived on a gray morning when the sky hung low and dull, and the world smelled of wet wood and rust. Clara was hanging wash in the yard, flannel shirts, Ellie's patched trousers, a pillowcase embroidered long ago by a hand steadier than hers. She saw the dust first, a faint coil in the distance, then the shape of a horse with a man slumped low in the saddle. Jonah stepped out of the barn and saw it too. His face changed, not with fear exactly, but with a readiness that had nothing to do with welcome. The rider stopped at the edge of the yard. His coat was slick with travel. A pistol sat heavy on his hip. He didn't take off his hat. "Jonah Keats," he said. "Heard you'd taken in strays." Jonah didn't move. "Who's asking?" The man smiled, slow and cold. "Name's Buck Lindell. I work for Tulliver out of Montrose." Clara felt a tightening in her chest. Tulliver. That name she knew. "Heard tell you've got a woman and 2 kids holed up here," Buck said. "Seems they skipped out on some debts. Folks back east are asking questions." Jonah stepped forward, placing himself square between Buck and the house. "This land's mine," he said. "Ain't nobody coming to take what's under this roof unless they mean to earn a bullet." Clara reached for the clothesline, gripping it tight. Her fingers ached. Buck leaned in his saddle, not afraid, just amused. "No need for fire, Keats. Just passing word. If she's who they say she is, there's a man in Gunnison with a paper says she owes him for breach of promise and unpaid board. He wants her back." Clara felt the world sway beneath her. That man, her sister's husband. She could still see the sneer on his face as he closed the door in hers. Could still feel Ellie tugging at her hand, confused, hungry. Jonah didn't look back at her. His voice stayed level. "You tell that man if he wants to drag a mother and 2 children out of a home, he's welcome to come try himself. See how far he gets." Buck gave a short laugh. "That a threat?" "No," Jonah said. "That's a promise." The rider tipped his hat, mock polite. "Suit yourself. But papers don't care about sentiment." He turned his horse with a jerk and trotted off back down the trail, dust rising behind him. When he was gone, Clara exhaled. Her hands trembled. Jonah turned to her. "You should've told me. I didn't think they'd follow." "I thought," she shook her head. "I didn't want trouble for you." Jonah stepped close. "Clara, you and the children, you're not trouble." She looked up at him. His face was lined with wind and old pain, but his eyes were steady. "I don't care what papers they bring. This is your home now, unless you don't want it." Her throat tightened. "I do," she said. "I want it." He reached for her hand, then fingers rough and warm against hers. She didn't pull away. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the wind brush against the eaves, thinking about that man in Gunnison, about what he might send next. A deputy. A writ. Worse. But she wasn't afraid the way she used to be. Jonah had stood in front of her without blinking, and something in her heart, hardened by too many goodbyes, began to soften in a way that felt like something close to faith. The next week passed under a hush of waiting. Jonah began checking the gate twice a day and oiled the rifle he kept above the hearth. Clara helped dig post holes farther out along the southern edge of the property, where the brush was thick and the ground still half frozen. Every swing of the spade felt like a question she couldn't quite answer. What would she do if they came? What would she risk? Sarah was strong enough now to sit outside in the sun, wrapped in Jonah's old coat, her hair pushed back under a kerchief Clara had sewn from a torn flour sack. Eli ran wild around the yard, stick in hand, like a sword, chasing shadows and kicking up dust. They laughed more. They sat around the table each evening with bowls of beans or potatoes, or sometimes just bread and water, but they talked. Jonah began to share stories, not grand ones, but pieces. About the time lightning struck the barn and he slept outside with the animals just to keep them calm. About a horse he once had that would only let him ride if he sang. Clara told him about the first pie she'd ever baked and how it had turned to ash when she forgot it in the oven. Jonah grinned at that. "You cook now like you've been doing it all your life," he said. "Necessity," she said, "and practice." He looked at her then, in that long way he did, like he was seeing something deeper than what showed on the surface. That night, after the children were in bed, they stood outside beneath a sky so clear the stars looked like they'd been hammered in by hand. The cottonwood tree rustled behind them. "I know we've only just begun," Jonah said, his voice low, almost unsure. Clara waited. "But if this were to go on," he said, "if you were to stay, I'd want to do it right." She turned to him. Her breath hung in the cold air. "What's right?" He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "I'd want to be a father to your children. I'd want to build a home where you never have to wonder when the next man might leave." Clara felt something shift in her chest, slow and deep. "You don't have to fix what someone else broke," she said. "I'm not trying to," he answered. "But I'd stand with you, if you'll have me." She reached for his hand and he took it. "I think I already do," she said. The wind moved through the grass like a blessing. Far off a coyote called, but it sounded like a song this time, not a warning. In the days that followed they prepared. Jonah rode into town and returned with a box under his arm and tension in his jaw. "Deputies heard talk," he said. "They might come with papers." "What do we do?" Clara asked. He handed her the box. Inside was a simple ring, silver, with a single scratch across the band. "Worn but strong. Married women have more rights," he said. "And a man can fight harder when he's standing beside his wife." She didn't cry. She took the ring and slid it on her finger. That Sunday, with Eli holding Jonah's hat and Sarah smiling from the porch, they said the words aloud in the field behind the house. No preacher, no guests, just the land and the wind, and a vow made in plain truth. Jonah kissed her, his hand warm at the side of her face. She closed her eyes and let herself lean in. The next morning the wagon came. 2 men in dark coats stepped down, holding papers, and the kind of pride that came from never having to wonder where their next meal would come from. Jonah stepped outside first. Clara followed. "You've got no right," she said, voice steady. "We've got law," the taller one replied. Jonah held out the marriage license. "So do we." It wasn't magic. It didn't make them back down. but it bought them time. Enough time for Jonah to summon the neighbor from 5 miles out, a wiry man, with a loud voice and no love for men who pushed around women and children. Within an hour, 5 ranchers stood shoulder to shoulder on Jonah's land. "You got a court in Montrose?" one asked. "Then take it there. But you'll not take a woman from her home by force. Not in this valley." The men in dark coats left. Clara watched the dust settle behind their wagon. Her legs nearly gave out, but Jonah was there, holding her steady. "It's done," he said. She shook her head. "No," she whispered, "it's just begun." Spring laid itself gently over the land, softening the edges left by winter. The ground, thawed clean and green, began to show in the gullies first, then the pasture. The cottonwood at the edge of the house opened its buds in slow gold leaves, trembling like they remembered what it meant to be alive. Clara moved through the house with sleeves rolled high and hair tied back in a kerchief, sweeping out the corners, scrubbing the floors with a pail of lye water humming low and steady. Her hands bore the stories, now nicked, calloused, browned by sun, but they moved with purpose. Sarah was stronger. She ran now barefoot in the morning dew, trailing behind Ellie like a younger shadow. They made forts in the shed and named the chickens. They talked about the garden they would plant, and Eli asked if he could have a row of his own. Clara said yes without hesitation. Jonah built her a table. He didn't ask, didn't say a word. Just went into the barn one morning and sawed and hammered until the sun had crossed the roof and shadows leaned long across the field. Then he carried it into the kitchen, set it down, and stood back. It was not beautiful, not in the way of store-bought things. The wood was knotty, the legs uneven, but it was strong, wide enough for sewing, kneading dough, sorting dried beans in the quiet of the evening. Clara stared at it, not moving. Her hands were still wet from washing. "You made this," she said. He nodded. "You needed a place for the work that matters." She stepped forward and laid her palm on the surface. Rough and smooth all at once. Her fingers traced a groove where the grain split near the edge. "It's the finest thing anyone's ever given me," she said. Jonah shifted his weight, cleared his throat. "It's just wood." "No," she said, looking up. "It's more." He didn't answer, just gave her a look she was beginning to recognize, quiet pride mixed with something more fragile. That evening they sat outside on the stoop, watching the sky bleed from blue to purple to black. The children had fallen asleep in a tangle of quilts, their feet dusty and their hair full of wind. "I never thought I'd have this again," Clara said. "A place. A man I could trust. A home that doesn't feel like something borrowed." Jonah didn't respond right away. He was whittling a small piece of pine, hands working in rhythm, shaving it down to something that would later look like an ox or a cow or a bird in flight. "You're not borrowing," he said. "You're building." She watched him for a long time. "Do you want more?" she asked quietly. "More than this?" He looked up. "I want what stays," he said. "Not just what comes easy." She reached over, took the carving from his hand, and held it between them. It was a small fox, unfinished, one paw lifted like it was about to run. "I want that too," she said. He leaned in, brushed his lips against her forehead. It was the smallest kiss, but it landed deep. Later, as she lay beside him in the dark, his arm draped across her waist, the steady rise of his breath warm against her neck, she thought about how quiet love could be. Not a fire, not a flood, just a steady rising of ground beneath your feet until you looked down one day and realized you were no longer falling. In May, the garden went in. Jonah tilled the soil with Eli riding the plow like a captain on a ship. Clara planted rows of beans, carrots, and onions, while Sarah dropped seeds 2 at a time, singing to each one. Neighbors came bringing cuttings and wire and extra nails. One woman gave Clara a wrapped parcel of muslin cloth. "For when the baby comes," she said with a wink. Clara blinked. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Jonah. That night she stood in the doorway, watching him shave by lamplight, the children asleep in the next room, the table gleaming faintly under the glow. "I'm with child," she said. He stopped, hand frozen halfway across his jaw. Then he smiled. Not big. Just enough. He walked to her, rested a hand on her belly, though nothing yet showed. "Well," he said, voice steady, "then we'd best build a cradle too." She laughed then, real and full. Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwood like it was saying yes. The fire still crackles. Subscribe and sit closer.